Larry Pendleton. Hello there. Thanks for coming. I'm glad that you liked the work. In case anybody's wondering, so today I'm still working on my UI. So yesterday, after ending the stream, I continued to work on the layers of UI, which I talked about. I said that I only like up to about 2 layers. Anything more, I think it's a little confusing. I think it's really confusing when you have UI on UI on UI on UI. So right now I just have 2 layers, or 2 layers that are shown at the same time. What's not shown can have as many layers as I want, but you don't want to overwhelm the user with a bunch of UI elements. So that was the fix that I worked on yesterday. I just fixed some spaghetti code. I think today is it's mostly the same thing, except I'm working on different parts of the code today. I have something called UI element. Typically a UI page has buttons, highlighted stuff, maybe some pictures, a lot of visual stuff, and each one of those things is an element. So and they can also be updated at runtime. So that's the general code that I have set up. They have been working pretty nicely. Today I just wanted to fix some of the dirty code, and in that process, the entire game as a whole should be slightly more manageable. Okay, Larry says, I'm wondering, in your UI design, do you use other tools to help you keep track of the flow and direction? That's a really interesting question. I don't use any third-party tools other than Unity UI itself, other than the canvas that's provided by the Unity engine. I'm guessing you're referring to maybe assets or some APIs. NGUI comes to my mind, or NGUI. That was really famous. when I was working in a South Korean game dev studio, pretty much everybody used NGUI. Well, not everybody, but a lot of game dev studios used NGUI at the time. I don't know what they use today. I'm guessing you're referring to one of those tools. I'm not using any of them right now. So if you go to my YouTube page, on the very first page, on the first few videos called devlogs, you're going to see very minimal UI, just some text and some shading, some numbers and buttons. I like to keep UI minimal. If I were working for a bigger company, that would be a very different question, because usually when you have a bigger game with a bigger budget, you have more stuff on the UI that is more interactive. You see more more animations and more fancy stuff in general. But when you're working on a game alone, an indie game, a lot of those resources are gone. They simply don't exist. So right now I don't see too much value in using something like NGUI in this particular project, because I like to keep things minimal so that I can focus more on the core gameplay and the multiplayer stuff, the actual stuff that makes the game run. So resources are very limited here. Oh, so I'm using everything. How the UI runs in this project is just my code that I have set up. Flow graphs. Okay, something like mind map would be. It doesn't run. It doesn't make the UI run, but it's a separate tool that helps you visualize things. Unless it's something along the lines of visual scripting, which I'm not using. I just like to write my code. Most of the stuff that you would have on something like a mind map or any kind of visual diagram, that's mostly in my head for this project. Or sometimes I just organize them on a piece of paper. I don't need a digital tool to do that. At least when I'm working alone. If I'm working with other people, then a separate visual tool would be nice, because that would make things so much more cleaner and easier to share. But I'm working alone here, so a piece of paper and pen will do. On things like Trello, I'm not a huge fan of those things. Yeah, I completely agree on how it's so easy to get caught up with the functionality of those tools when you can have just a whiteboard and a piece of paper. But again, if you have a bigger team, those things might come in really handy. But again, even in bigger companies did exist way back when those visual tools didn't exist, and a lot of them simply worked on pencil and paper, and a lot of, well, this was back in the 90s. A lot of construction companies still had just pencil and paper, and things were a lot less digital. Today, pretty much everything is digital, and the things about digital tools is that they're not. Obviously, it's not as physical as a simple pencil and paper, which never breaks down physically, unless you literally break your pencil or rip the paper. The thing about digital tools is that they are a bunch of ones and zeros that represents something else. So you have one more layer instead of a direct pencil and paper, or any kind of tool where you have direct physical result. There's nothing in between. I mean, if you hit something with a hammer, there's nothing between your hammer and the nail. But when you have something inside your computer on your memory with a bunch of ones and zeros that represent those things, all of a sudden you have a lot more moving parts that could possibly go wrong. And not just from reliability. I think digital stuff, just because they have a lot of layers that are built on top of each other, reliability becomes sort of an issue. If you have really good software, robust software, it's not really, but in a lot of cases it is. But also, it's a lot harder to control something with your mouse and what you see on your screen. And you need, you most of the time you have to spend time learning the interface, whereas you don't see that obviously with a lot simpler, more primitive tools. So, but it depends. Sometimes I like digital stuff. Sometimes I just like simpler tools. Depends on the situation. But for most of my projects, so this is just me, my preference. For most of my projects in which I work alone, I just like to keep things in my head. Unless it's something really important, like passwords, those things you have to keep somewhere. You can't rely on your brain for something like 20 random characters, unless you're really smart, which I'm not. So most of my projects, the stuff, the design, the general plan are in my head. Sometimes I write stuff down, but I like to keep that minimal. I think a lot of times people overemphasize taking notes. And I see a lot of people reaching a point where taking notes itself becomes work that sort of detracts you from the actual work. And I think a lot happens with things like Trello, stuff like that. So that's my thoughts. Game developer, welcome back. You're from Afghanistan. Wow. I think you're the first. So the project is going pretty well. You can check out the devlog on my YouTube channel. Game developer says, I want to know, what did you make all of those models with, which you use in the current game? Oh, I didn't make any of those models. All the models that I'm using in my current project, they're from the Unity Asset Store. So let me look at one of my own videos. So I'm looking at the most recent devlog video. Yeah, I listed a whole bunch of the links for each of the assets that I used. So for this particular video, I used something called New York, FPS weapons pack, low poly FPS pack, muzzle flashes, magic light probes, all sky. I'm not an artist, so it's really difficult for me to come up with art that looks good, other than the stick figures which I drew for my fighting game. I am trying to teach myself how to draw. I have a little sketchbook right here where I'm just trying to learn how to use, your pencil to shade different lighting and stuff. Yeah, it's fun, but it's pretty clear to me that I'm not that talented in art. So a lot of the visual stuff are from the Unity Asset Store. And on that note, I see a lot of newcomers coming in and looking at these Unity assets and say, oh, these assets look great. I can build my own game with these things. You can't. You cannot build your game purely out of assets. You sort of can have a very rudimentary... I mean, when you build something completely out of assets, it's not even a finished product. But you can still call it a game, but nobody's gonna really enjoy it. So still gotta put in a lot of work. By the way, I don't know if you guys can hear the noise, but my neighbor is moving out. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. I hope that doesn't go into the microphone. Larry Pennington says, do you have an approach to scalability in your programming? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Because you're always considering scalability. The only question is how much. So for my current project, I'm not expecting this project to be able to scale to something like a AAA game that 100,000 people play at the same time. I'm still thinking about scalability, but it's nowhere near that amount. But normally, I think you're constantly thinking about it. Things like manageability, how can you add more stuff later on, how many players can you handle, there's optimization. But if you're referring to the general philosophy of scalability in programming, I don't really have a say, or I don't really have an opinion, because it depends on individual projects. Larry says, I struggle with adding in additional features or mechanics without rewriting everything. Okay, now I see what you're saying. So I think a lot of that happens because you have very specific code that is God, I keep forgetting these terms. I think a lot of it probably has to do with dependencies that you're not thinking about. Uh, but that only comes over time as you gain more experience. I think there is no specific method for you to be able to write manageable code in general. There are general principles, but if you want to be able to apply those things, you need a lot of experience, a lot of trial and error, plus reading a lot of books, watching a lot of videos. So your general experience matters a lot, much more so than an article you might read, for example. So if I get into the specifics, so right now, since I'm working on my UI, I have something called, so if I go into the game, you can barely see my screen, but so I have a bunch of elements in my UI, but I don't write code specifically for each of them, unless I have to. In that case, I might have something like an interface that hides how individual elements update, and from the outside, from whatever code that might require that interface, doesn't even matter how the specific update works. So those little things. I mean, there are certain principles that you need to follow, that a lot of people follow, but again, those things only apply to you if you have enough experience to be able to use them. What happens a lot with Unity is that so you might have a player, and you want the player to be able to detect a collision from a bullet, for example. A lot of beginners will go into the player script and say, find a game component called bullet and do something with it. Once you do that, now your player is completely dependent on the bullet working in a specific way. So one of the more common ways is just having one more abstract layer that stands in between, which allows the player to not care about how a bullet behaves, and it doesn't even have to be a bullet. It might be another abstract layer, something like an object, some sort of a game object inside a game, and it could be a bullet, it could be another person, it could be some environment. I mean, these are just basic coding principles. I can't even remember the names for them, but again, as you gain experience, you get more used to them. So that's pretty much it. Okay, so here's another example. So right now, when you play an FPS game, you can press tab and then you get a whole list of players that are in the game, and you get their something like the kill death ratio and other info. I don't have that right now, but I want to add that feature. I don't go straight into writing that specific code. So right now I'm thinking about, so based on my existing code, something like that would be one UI element, and I'm thinking what I don't have is adding or removing certain elements at runtime. When I initialize a UI canvas, I have a whole bunch of lists of elements that I initialize, and that list does not change until I destroy that UI. So now, instead of that, I might need another feature where I can add a tab menu and delete it when you let go of the tab. So something like that. Game developer says, I'm talking about my experience. I study Unity and C# programming for 10 years from 11 years old. Now I'm 11. I am not pro yet, but I can make any mechanics and features I want to do in my game by making logics and make code upon on that logic. I started to program with learning Unity C#. Okay. Remember what I said last night or yesterday? If you're serious about coding or any sort of programming, if you just learn Unity and C#, I think that's a red flag. Yes, you can make a lot of things work within Unity using C#, but there's a lot more to that in a typical video game. Also, you don't want to use the amount of years that you spent to express your experience or express your level of knowledge in programming, because that pretty much has zero relevance unless you're talking about someone who just got started versus someone who worked in a large company for like 20 years. Unless the gap is that huge, there's everything in between. You might have a person who just got started. You might have a prodigy. I'm thinking of an extreme example right now. You might have a 17-year-old prodigy that might hack an iPhone or something, or you might, on the other side, you might have a local developer in my city that has been working for 20 years, but most of the time he's working on superficial things, one small part inside a large company, and he's nowhere near that level of understanding that the 17-year-old has. And the guy has been in, and his career is longer than the kid's life. So the amount of time, whenever somebody says I spent 10 years in coding, I see that as another red flag. Unless there's some specific context that, that needs to be stated. Larry says, I have a better understanding now, I believe, from what you're saying. Look at dependencies in different ways. Don't always code one-way dependencies. Yeah, I guess you can say that. That's just one. I only gave you one specific example, so I think you get that. But again, there's a lot of things at play when you make a video game that runs at something like 200 frames per second. So one coding principle is not going to be enough. You have to put everything together. And that simply comes from experience. Unless some people do understand code when they just look at things. Some people are just smart. That is extremely rare, I think. A lot of times, usually it takes time. For someone like me, like I had to spend years just to be able to build some sort of a game mechanic that I want, and not just building it, making it work with other mechanics that I might download or that I might write up. So putting things together is pretty difficult, I would say. So yeah, I mean, you just need more experience. And every day I talk about this. Unity and C# plays a very small role in that experience. When I say experience, I'm referring to stuff like learning different languages, participating in different projects, not just game development. Maybe you're building a homepage, maybe you're building an Android app, or maybe some PC app, maybe even a simple calculator, maybe you're working with spreadsheets. Your general understanding of programming translates to your ability to put together different game mechanics into one final product. So don't just stick to Unity and C#. Once you do that, you're having a very narrow view of things, which I think is extremely detrimental to your learning process and your ability to build a decent product. It's just what I think. And I don't think I have seen a successful game developer. I don't think I've seen anybody have a successful game dev career just learning Unity and C Sharp. I don't think I've seen any of that case. You can get away with it. You can get away working on one small part of a game for a company, only understanding Unity and C Sharp. That does happen, but if you do that, I think you're at a significant disadvantage versus people that understand a lot more than just Unity GUI and C Sharp scripting. Sizer Studio says, do you think it's a better idea for me to post early on my development, or should I wait until I've made significant enough progress for screenshots? I think this is a very interesting topic. It's generally more about marketing than development itself when you're talking about when should you post your progress, or how should you do it, or what you should post online, so that you can gather people that like your game and have them play your game. This is more like a business question. I think you might want to take a page from one of those Gary V videos. I don't know if you've heard of him. Gary V EE. I don't believe in everything that he says. I think he's also biased to some extent, but I also think a lot of the things that he says are true. Meaning you sort of want to integrate your marketing with the stuff that you do and make it natural so that you're constantly creating content. But I'm pretty much the wrong person to ask, because I'm extremely introverted, and I just hit record and post whatever. I'm also not that good with packaging stuff into a very nice presentable format. I have trouble with that because I'm lazy. But following the general philosophy, I'm not even sure if you can call it a philosophy, but strategy would be a better term. Following the general Gary Vee strategy, you want to post as much as you can, as early as you can. I know a lot of game developers disagree with me on this. They say if I post early, people are going to look at it and they're going to copy it. I think those people are getting way ahead of themselves. So I like to make things open source as soon as I start a project. This one I can't, because I have a bunch of assets that I do not own, and I can't make that open source. But if I do have assets that I own, if I paid an artist to do it, I would 100% make it open source right from the start, as early as possible. Start posting the process. But there's different opinions on this. Bigger companies with a big marketing budget generally hide things until it's ready, or it's close to ready, and then they put out an awesome video that goes viral, and then there's a lot of hype. That kind of strategy, I think, is mostly for bigger companies. For individuals, I think you should just post as much as you can. But my idea on people copying your stuff is this. It's very unlikely that you're going to come up with something that has never been done before. It's very unlikely. What's more likely is that you're going to add a little bit of your own taste, a little bit of your own style to what's already popular. In that case, everybody's copying everybody. Everybody's taking a page out of somebody else's book, and that just happens constantly. And if you have a game where it's tempting enough for someone else to copy, that's a good sign. Most of the time, people don't want to copy your stuff. Most of the time, you're not even noticed. And no matter how much money you spend trying to enforce some copyright stuff, or you're trying to enforce everyone to not cheat or to not copy your game and spread it somewhere else, I don't think any successful game in history have been successful at stopping those things. If your game is good, somebody's going to copy it somewhere. My idea is, as soon as you make something open source, nobody steals something that is open source. It's already gone. Like the chance of stealing, like the idea of stealing something that is open source, that doesn't even work. And when a lot of people start using your open source stuff, you're going to get a lot of opportunities just out of that. At that point, you're a platform. So that's my general strategy in things. And I would also like to take a page out of Gary Vee's book, make in terms of game development, make things open source, and post as much as you can. That way you get feedback. You're not 100%, but you can be pretty sure you own that stuff. You might not own that on some legal paper, but when you have a community around you that where people know you came up with certain open source code, nobody's taking that away from you. Sizer says, I agree 100%. I know it's delusional because it's not even particularly good art, but it's a nagging feeling. Yeah, I think we all feel like that. I saw a post like that on Reddit. I've tried to quell those fears to someone else, but I have it too. Yeah. So you got to think about what's more damaging to your game or your project. And offset that against the positive sides of putting things out early and getting hype around it. I think generally people don't like paying for software. Generally people don't like paying for code. And it's very unlikely that you're going to stop somebody from copying your stuff. And there's a very thin line between stealing and looking at somebody else's idea, adding something and creating value out of that. That's a very thin line, I think. So, I mean, I think that has been working out pretty well for me, going out early and making things as open as possible. Hello, Mr. Watermeal. Welcome again. I hope you're having a good day. But this is a pattern I see. I see a lot of people, a lot of indie game developers worrying about things that is most likely it is very unlikely to happen, or they're getting way ahead of themselves. They're worrying about C# as a language. They're worried about C++ as a language. All those questions, I think, are pretty irrelevant to you and your skills and knowledge and your project. Hello, some random bloke. Welcome again. I hope you're doing well. Good night, Larry. So no matter what you do, once you have a product, somewhere someone's going to copy it if it's good. Even some of the biggest companies spend millions or billions, I don't know the exact number, but a lot of money on security. It never works. Well, I shouldn't say never. It doesn't work most of the time. Like whenever a company comes out with some groundbreaking technology, even if it's copyrighted, somewhere in China somebody's going to take that and sell it as if it's his own. So, why not build a community around your stuff? Make it open source. That way you're providing value to people around you or people who are interacting with you online, which will lead to more people being noticed, more people noticing your project, and that opens a lot more opportunities. So unless you have a giant legal budget and lawyers that can enforce certain copyright stuff, I wouldn't even go down that road. Game developer says, what do you think about how to protect single player games from cracking, which made by indie game developers, because it's a very bad situation for indie developers? I don't think it's a very bad situation. There is no protection against someone cracking your code Like if somebody has your code, unless everything is server authoritative and somebody has to hack the server to get your code, most of the time when you have a single player client and somebody downloads that, somebody's going to crack it 100%. If there's enough money or enough incentive for someone else to crack it, somebody's going to crack it. So and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Well, the act itself is pretty bad, but you can ride the wave. It doesn't mean that you are completely shut down from building your single player game as an indie game developer. And this goes back to what I said. I would come out early and be as transparent as possible, which would make stealing by logical sense almost impossible. Like you can't steal something that is open source. You can't steal something that thousands of people attribute the work to. Again, it's not really yours. It may not be yours legally, or if you on paper, but when an entire community knows that it's your work, then something like that becomes much more difficult to steal or take credit for somewhere else, especially online stuff these days. Unless you go behind a firewall in China and completely speak a different language, then pretty much stealing is really easy. But that's a different story. 알아줬어, 야? 응? 알았어? 아니야? 응? All right, I think I'm gonna end the stream now. So today, I almost finished writing an additional function for me to add different UI elements at runtime during the gameplay, instead of just being able to do it in the beginning of a stage or a scene. So that's almost done. I'm gonna end the stream and finish that off, and I'm gonna head out for lunch. So thanks guys for watching. I see some familiar names now, so a big thanks to those who are coming back and watching and talking and stuff. So it's been fun, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks guys.